Okay, so welcome to the pro-human movement. I'm going to play a short video to start.
I'm Daryl Davis.
I'm Steven Pinker.
I'm John McWhorter.
I'm Barry Weiss.
I am Glenn Lowry.
I'm Melissa Chen.
I am Ayan Hirsi Ali.
I'm Zed Jelani.
I'm Coleman Hughes.
My name is Eli Steele, and I support FAIR.
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 Today, almost 70 years after Brown versus Board of Education ushered in the civil rights movement, there is an urgent need to reaffirm and advance its core principles.
To insist on our common humanity.
To advocate for fairness and understanding.
To demand that we are each entitled to equality under the law.
To bring about a world in which we are all judged by the content of our character and not by the color of our skin.
That's where FAIR comes in.
FAIR is the foundation against intolerance and racism.
FAIR gets that our civil rights and liberties need to be protected.
It's not enough just to be anti-racist. We also need to be pro-human, moving forward together as one race, the human race. Join FAIR in support of compassionate, pro-human anti-racism, rooted in our dignity and our common humanity.
Join us.
So I'm always struck by what Daryl Davis says in that video, which is it's not enough just to be anti-racist. We also need to be pro-human. And I think that's something that we will keep coming back to. In terms of how we see this issue and how we frame this issue, I think the most important thing for everyone to understand is that we are not a partisan organization. We are a nonpartisan organization. And we don't see this as a partisan issue. We don't see this as an issue of left versus right. We see this as an issue of moving backward as a society toward a past where not only skin color determined character and moral authority, but also conflict was resolved through public shaming, tyranny of the mob, because there was no concept of an objective truth, a breakdown of the judicial system, the legal system. People lived by different sets of rules based on their skin color and based on other immutable characteristics, and a past where people were fearful and closed-minded to anything, anyone, any ideas that would challenge their beliefs. We see a positive path forward to a future where we actually realize the dream of being able to judge people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin, which is not to say that racism and intolerance don't exist, they do. But what we're saying is that we want to move forward toward a future where they don't exist, where we actually can put an end to racism. Part of our approach and what we believe is that it's important that people who share our values reclaim the language of morality. And so there are some terms that we're using that we think are important for everyone on this webinar to understand. One is the concept of being pro-human. And that means advocating for one human race, universal civil rights and liberties, and compassionate opposition to racism and intolerance rooted in dignity and our common humanity. The second definition that we think is important to put out there is the definition of anti-racist. Anti-racist still means opposed to racism. And I think it's important to understand that this is a word that has been used by some people who are pushing an intolerant orthodoxy in the wrong way. It's been used to describe a belief system that is fundamentally institutionalizing racism as opposed to opposing racism. Neo-racism is a term that we did not invent. It was conceived of several decades ago as a form of cultural racism. And we've tweaked the definition slightly, but neo-racism is just a belief that race is a real and inescapable social construct that determines an individual's identity, agency, beliefs, ability, or culture such that members of different race groups can never understand each other due to intrinsic and insurmountable cultural differences. And this concept of neo-racism is very similar to what is being taught in many schools and many workplaces in the form of critical race theory. I'm going to play a short video. This is by a comedian named Ryan Long, which is just, I think, exemplifying the similarities between neo-racism and racism, which is not a surprise because neo-racism is just a form of racism.
When me and Brad first met, I didn't think we'd get along, but turns out we kind of agree on everything. Your racial identity is the most important thing. Everything should be looked at through the lens of race.
Jinx, you owe me a Coke. We both have a lot of opinions about people of color, even though we barely know any.
I say colored people, but as long as we're classifying them, we both think minorities are a united group who think the same and act the same.
And vote the same. You don't want to lose your black card. Sorry, I don't know. I just think we should
roll back discrimination laws so we can hire based on race again. Jinx, now you owe me a Coke. Hey, tell them what you told me yesterday.
White actors should only do voices for white cartoon characters.
I've been saying that for years. Stick to your own.
Us white people, we have so much privilege.
I agree. It is a privilege to be white. Ask him about interracial dating.
All I said is that black men who date white women have internalized racism, and white men that date ethnic women are fetishizing them.
Guys against interracial dating now. Like, am I being pranked? Did Boomer put you up to this?
Ugh, you know that taco place is white owned?
White people should be making white foods like Kraft macaroni and cheese, no seasoning, not even salt. It's like he's a mind reader. I mean, I've been pushing for segregation forever, and my man does what?
I created an improv comedy show exclusively for ethnic people.
Guy segregates comedy on my birthday.
White people need to stop wearing dreadlocks, and they need to stop appropriating black people's music.
Shaved heads and country music, the way God intended.
You know all white people are racist.
I'm listening.
Even if you have a black wife or a black friend group, you're still really racist.
You know, we just kicked a guy out of the organization for having a black girlfriend, but if you can promise me he's still really racist, we'll consider letting him back in. Black people should only shop at black businesses.
I guess the only thing we really disagree about is I think white people are the root of all evil.
But what did I tell you, though? If we can narrow that down to a certain group of tiny-hatted white people, I think we can come to an understanding.
Technically, I don't consider Jewish people white.
Neither do I.
So Ryan Long, great comedian. He's done lots of stuff. Definitely recommend searching for him on YouTube. This slide is, for me, represents, in the words of Oliver Wendell Holmes, the simplicity on the other side of complexity. I spent literally 3 months in the fall, last fall, trying to understand what was happening as I became aware of what was happening at my kids' school. And then I went down the rabbit hole of trying to understand where this was coming from. And I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of amazing people, many of whom are on the board of advisors for FAIR. And really at its heart, the new orthodoxy that we're dealing with is postmodernism. And I'll talk about that in a minute, but it's a postmodernist philosophy, which is masquerading as anti-racism, or even masquerading, I would argue, as critical race theory. Fundamentally, this is a case where the gift is postmodernism, the gift wrapping is critical race theory. And that's important to understand, and I'll get into that in a minute. The other input to the new orthodoxy is Stokely Carmichael's Black Power morality, moral code, and then intersectionality, which is more of a, has been applied as more of a Marxist framework of saying that everyone's either a victim or an oppressor based on their intersectional identity. All of that came together in critical race theory, which is just a way, it's a way of looking at the world like any academic theory. And looking at the world, in the case of critical race theory, it's looking at the world as consisting of different socially constructed groups, which are in conflict with each other and which are all affected by the dominant group, which is defined as whiteness. As a theory, critical race theory would not be dangerous. Where it became an issue is that instead of being taught as a theory, for decades now on our college campuses, critical race theory has been taught as reality. So through a process of thought reform, which is analogous to how Scientology is introduced. So based on the premise of unconscious bias, many college students have gone through this process, many workplaces have gone through this process of teaching this new belief system, which ultimately arrives at a fundamental change in the underlying philosophy of people, which has absolutely nothing to do with anti-racism or multiculturalism or any of the promises that are made by the people who have been pushing this. So what is the new orthodoxy, and why do I say that postmodernism is what really matters? Well, the fundamental pillars of the philosophy of the new orthodoxy really are postmodernist. The first is that this concept that power is truth, and this is saying that there is no objective truth, and this is an important thing to understand, because fundamentally our legal system, the scientific method, there are a lot of things that are based on an acceptance of the fact that there are things that are provable or disprovable. And so if you actually adopt a belief system that says that actually, depending on which socially constructed group you belong to, your truth may vary, then that means that you are starting to create a division across these different groups where different groups can have different realities, different truths, and you're undermining this whole system of cooperation. The second pillar is the concept of moral relativity. And this is really important to understand that that morality, as as most of us, I think, were raised, there is a sense of right and wrong. Moral relativity is saying, actually, there is no universal right and wrong, and it's up to each socially constructed group to define its own right and wrong. And so that's where somebody who's adopted the new orthodoxy or embraced the new orthodoxy may say something like, well, female genital mutilation in sub-Saharan Africa, really that's a cultural trait of that region. We shouldn't apply our moral code on them. What that's ignoring is the fact that the women who are being subjected to that obviously had no choice in being born into that particular culture. But that's how moral relativity comes to apply in the case of the new orthodoxy. The third concept is this concept of a perpetual zero-sum power struggle. And this is the one that really, I think, creates a lot of the conflict that we see in the world, and a lot of the fear, that the real palpable fear that we see in people who have embraced the new orthodoxy. Because if you believe that life consists of different socially constructed groups that are in a perpetual power struggle, and that a gain for one group is a loss for another group, as opposed to seeing the world as a place where you have a lot of different people with different backgrounds coming together, and that there are synergies from people coming together, and that it's not a zero-sum power struggle, then you're going to see the world as a dangerous place, and a place where you really need to be an aggressive activist in order to get what you want. The fourth pillar of the new orthodoxy is this concept of racial realism. So what you'll notice is that on the one hand, there's an acknowledgement of the fact that race is a social construct, that race is not real. But then the rest of the time, if you're in a workshop, or the remaining 10, 11 years of curriculum, if this is being rolled out in a K through 12 program, is spent teaching people that actually race is not only real, but race should be the basis of your identity, that you should really organize your entire life around this fake concept of race. The last underlying pillar is this concept of an intersectional hierarchy of oppressions. And this is that victim oppressor framework of saying that based on your immutable characteristics, you are either born into an oppressor role or a victim role, or in many cases, you're going to be a victim or an oppressor, depending on the nature of your immutable characteristics. The moral code for the new orthodoxy is very simple, and it's really geared toward, I would say, destruction, because it's that all of the systems, the institutions, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, everything that was created by white culture is inherently for the benefit of white culture, and therefore, if you are somebody who is from that culture, your responsibility is to deconstruct, which is another word for destroy or dismantle, all of those institutions. And that's where the concept of defunding the police or, or doing away with the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, comes from. And if you are a member of an oppressed group, right? So technically I would be considered BIPOC, right? By the New Orthodoxy. You are a race traitor if you stand up against the New Orthodoxy. And so you'll notice that there is an especially high level of vitriol targeting people who are members of the oppressed groups when they speak up, because they are not only not following the moral code, they are also race traitors. So that's the New Orthodoxy. And why does it matter if a minority of people have embraced this new belief system, right? There are lots of strange belief systems in the world. Why do we care? Well, we care because the perception that you have, the lens that you view the world through really shapes your reality. And I think this quote from Michel Foucault is a really helpful one and really telling, which is, my point is not that everything is bad, but that everything is dangerous, which is not exactly the same as bad. If everything is dangerous, then we always have something to do. So my position leads not to apathy, but to a hyper and pessimistic activism. And so Michel Foucault, who was one of the creators of postmodernism, he was referred to by Time magazine in 1981 as the Prince of Power. There was a reference to the cult of Michel Foucault. I think that if you have embraced this new orthodoxy, you've embraced the worldview of Michel Foucault, and you will come out of potentially the same experience that somebody who has a healthier pro-human lens, and you would come out of that experience with grievance and pessimism and despair instead of gratitude and optimism and hope. And why do we care if the lens you're viewing the world through leads to grievance and pessimism and despair? Well, we care about it because we know that positive character strengths, gratitude, optimism, right, forgiveness, these are character strengths that help people emotionally, but even physically. So there's been plenty of empirical research that has shown that embracing gratitude and optimism, and a concept of learned optimism instead of learned helplessness, is actually good for emotional health and physical health, and in particular for children. I'm just going to play a short excerpt from a video on this concept of learned helplessness versus learned optimism.
Imagine you take two dogs and put them in two different areas. You shock the first dog and you give him an option to escape. He tries to escape, he's successful, and he gets away from the shocks. The second dog, however, you put in a place where no matter what he does, he cannot escape the shocks. He soon figures out that there's nothing he can do, he gives up, and he'll just sit there and accept the shocks. Now you take these two dogs and put them in two new areas again, but this time they can both escape. The first dog, who had learned that he was able to escape, will get out of there like usual. But the second dog will just lay there and accept the shocks, even though in this new environment, he could just escape. This is what is known as learned helplessness, and you probably know people who act like the helpless dog. The opposite of this is learned optimism. Learned optimism is basically the idea that you can learn to be optimistic and positive and happy. You can cultivate these things. And this is exactly what Seligman was trying to do by running a workshop. The results of the workshop were promising. 32% of the students in the control group had a moderate to severe episode of depression, in contrast to 22% of the group that was in the workshop. Also, 15% of the controls had an episode of generalized anxiety disorder versus only 7% of people who took the workshop.
So I'm going to stop that video there, but this is really important to think about. Is we have schools now in K through 12 that have started teaching our children to be pessimistic, full of grievance, and full of resentment. And what that does to them psychologically, we know is damaging. And if you look at what's been happening, in particular to young girls, who I think are much more affected by this, it's really troubling. So so I think that what we've been seeing is that in K through 12, there's now a focus on teaching first race consciousness, which is the concept that that people are in fact defined by the color of their skin, and that they should identify, they should join affinity groups. There are activities to draw self-portraits and name your skin color, right? That's the first step to race consciousness. And it doesn't end there. Then once you are made to be race conscious, you are then taught that you are either a victim or an oppressor based on your immutable characteristics. And so that ends up creating all sorts of issues with identity formation for these children. So, really what's been happening with the New Orthodoxy in our colleges is that we've been reprogramming for decades now people to be hyper and pessimistic activists, in the words of Michel Foucault. So we've had high school graduates who are coming out of homes where they are taught positive character strengths. They are taught optimism and gratitude and forgiveness and all the things that are really required to have a healthy and functioning society and healthy and functioning individuals. And over 4 years of college, or 2 years, or however many years somebody's in higher education, it's not surprising that many people are coming out of that experience really embracing the Michel Foucault postmodernist worldview, because they've been led through that thought reform process. And I think the moment that I decided to throw myself into launching FAIR is when I came to understand that this has now migrated from colleges, where at least you could say that's an adult or somebody who's on the cusp of adulthood and they have a fighting chance. And it's now been brought into K through 12. And children as young as 5 are now being taught to see the world through this pessimistic lens. And they don't have a chance. If schools are now teaching our children this, often, obviously at home, we can try to counter this. But if kids are spending 8 hours a day in school with minimal oversight, minimal visibility into curriculum by parents, then a lot of this new orthodoxy is just going to be a given for our children. So obviously we can try as parents to protect our own kids, and I think many of us do, and many of our kids will be just fine. But the other concern that I have as a human being, as an American, is what this worldview means for our society. What does this mean for our future and for the future of humanity? And one way to look at this is through the lens of character. This is based on information from an organization called VIA Institute on Character, which has looked across societies around the world and has identified 24 different character strengths across a number of different virtue categories, which they have identified as universal. So the idea is that across societies around the world, all the continents, these are the character strengths that are recognized as being of value to a healthy functioning society, healthy functioning individuals. And they include concepts like fairness, leadership, forgiveness, humor. And across the board, when you look at these character strengths, what's troubling is that the new orthodoxy has literally flipped them on their head. So the concept of fairness, which is generally recognized as treating everyone fairly, giving everyone the same chance, applying the same rules to everyone, is now being used to justify discrimination, right, against people based on the group that they belong to, based on their new group identity as defined by the new orthodoxy. Leadership is viewed as being responsible for guiding groups to meaningful goals and ensuring good relations among group members. And under the new orthodoxy, leaders are actually being asked and required to divide the group into subgroups and then pit those subgroups against each other. Across the board, you look at these character strengths, and the new orthodoxy is literally flipping these character strengths on their head. So what is FAIR going to do about this? FAIR is focused on a multi-pronged effort to shift our culture forward. We don't think this is a political issue. We don't think this is that this is just an issue of education. We think that this is a cultural issue. And so there are three ways that we're going to go about this. And we're already starting to go about this. One is to educate people. So we want to raise awareness of what's happening. We want to broaden the audience, and we want to make it easy for people to understand. I mean, it took me 3 months to really understand what was going on. We want to make that something where in 5 minutes, somebody can watch a video or read something and really start to understand what's going on and find it from credible sources, right? So, there wasn't any organization like FAIR when I was trying to understand what was going on. When I was trying to turn to organizations that I had trusted and grown up with, like the ACLU, I found that in fact, they were not only standing up for my values, but they were actually advocating for the values of the New Orthodoxy, which really concerned me. So we want to educate people. And part of that is obviously awareness building. The other part, though, is making sure that we have pro-human options for curriculum, for workplace training. So we are not rejecting the concept of DEI. We embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. What we want is to make sure that DEI, anti-racism, all of these, great words are actually delivering on the promise, and that DEI is actually available that's based on pro-human values. The second area of focus for us is empowering people. And this is a huge task. And it's something that we're really excited about, because that's where all of you come in. And I think, Orly, when I finish, is going to talk a little bit about where we are with this process of setting up a national network of FAIR chapters. We've launched a few of them already. And, and I'm just so amazed at the courageous people who have already started the process of speaking up and standing up. And we're just there to support everybody who's already doing that. The third area of focus for FAIR is to advocate for people and advocate for civil rights and liberties. And that means standing up for people who are being bullied, and also taking legal action as required. So there are a number of lawsuits where FAIR has already been supporting people behind the scenes, and there are going to be many more that we will be involved in directly or indirectly. So with that, I will open it up for, actually, I'll turn it over to Orly to speak a little bit about the chapter formation, and then we'll open up for Q&A. Oh, and Letitia can introduce herself as well.
Thanks so much, Brian, and thank you everybody for attending the event. So right now across the country, we're launching about 25 chapters. We have a few that are already up and running and very active. Chapters form to provide a sense of community for our members that are feeling very alone and very isolated in what's going on at their schools or their workplaces. So our chapters are going to be really providing strength in numbers. We're going to be having workshops and trainings in how to advocate, how to bridge divide, depolarize, and we have a lot of really wonderful workshops that are going to be coming up. We'll also be providing media training. So if each community is dealing with different issues within their community, we'll be able to kind of tailor and customize press releases or help craft messaging in the community and get the word out. We have the ability in our on our website that each chapter will have their own sitelet, so they can really customize the sitelet and be able to provide articles, calls to action, petitions, and communicate with their members there. Another role that the chapter would function as is to provide, is to build alliances with other organizations that are working towards the same goal. And really what we're finding right now, people are just feeling so relieved to have found FAIR, to be able to start networking and linking up with other people who are experiencing this intolerance. I myself got involved with FAIR because I have this happening at my daughter's school, and it was very, very isolating to try and speak up. And we did, we were very outspoken about it. But the more that we can come together to try and inspire the moral courage to do so in a way that really bridges divide, that we do this with fairness and with kindness and with respect, and that we're able to provide alternatives that will really land us at the same place in overcoming racism and bigotry, self-hatred, hatred for others, And we can help our children and really set the example that there is a way to intrinsically motivate human beings to stand up against these injustices. And FAIR really has some wonderful tools and resources. So we have built out toolkits for parents who are speaking up against their school administration or speaking at their school board. We have toolkits to understand critical race theory in easily digestible ways. Like Bai and myself, I spent probably starting last May or June, July, just reading endlessly, trying to understand the complexity of this situation, to know that I was not indeed crazy, that I was really coming from a place of deep concern. My grandparents were in the Holocaust, so I went through some pretty extensive education as to how when people are divided and put into categories, it doesn't really end well. So I'd love to hear from all of you. You're all already asking some questions about how you can get in touch with us to form chapters. So I'll be messaging you, and I can give you email addresses of specific people that you can contact in your area. We do have it broken down by region. And really, our sense of chapters is we're propelling the pro-human movement forward, capturing the energy right now. There's just amazing energy going across the country. There's so many great groups. And so it's wonderful to be able to bring them all on board with FAIR and provide them with all these resources.
Great, thank you, Orly. And Letitia, before you say anything, I just did want to get to a few of the questions. And then Letitia Kim is the head of the FAIR Legal Network. So I think there were a few questions around legal, and so I'll let Letitia handle those. So there was a question about white culture by Kenneth. And yeah, I mean, we would agree we don't think there's such a thing as race-specific cultures. There's just culture, and I think in the case of American culture, we have a country that was founded based on an idea. It didn't always live up to the ideals of the founding, but it has been a project that has been moving forward in the right direction, and we want to make sure that it continues to move forward in the right direction and doesn't move backward as the New Orthodoxy is taking it. So we would agree that we don't like the term white culture or referring to a culture as based on a skin color. Paul, anything else that you want to jump at?
Yeah, there was a question here from a professor or teacher. I think it's kind of something that I had to wrestle with as a teacher. She asks, the non-falsifiability of CRT seems like a real trap, especially for teachers. If I give a student a bad grade, I can be accused of committing a microaggression. If I try to defend myself, I'll be further accused of white fragility or having unconscious bias. How can we reintroduce falsifiability as a criterion? So falsifiability is really how we know that a theory is true, because if you can't test it for its falseness, we can't really show that it's true. And then this is something that I had to deal with. And it really is a trap. There's really no way to win, because anything that you assert as being contradictory is going to be expressive of your bias. So I think what's really important in that context is to call it out and to be very clear. It's not something that you're going to be able to convince anyone of, but you can at least defend your position and articulate it clearly, that the belief system itself has this flaw in it, and we need to really make that clear, to people and educate people on that, the fact that it traps us all in this system. So my advice would be, don't waste your energy too much trying to convince true believers of this, but try to get the message out to parents and to other people that might have a willing ear about this, that this is a major concern and a trap that's keeping teachers in.
Great, thank you, Paul. We have multiple questions about the word equity, and equity still means fairness, right? It's still in the dictionary. It has been used by some to mean discrimination in order to achieve equal outcomes, but that is not what equity means. When we use equity, we mean fairness, but we would also acknowledge that there is not in our society today equality of opportunity. So our focus is on achieving a society where everyone does have a shot. And so I think that equity is a word that we are comfortable using and reclaiming from those who are using it to mean that we need to force the outcomes for every single individual, or at the group level, but ultimately that means for every single individual to be exactly the same.
Here's a question about how much of this is actually taught in schools of education. And the answer to that is it has a tremendous influence in schools of education. The work of Henry Giroux and Paulo Freire, both of whom are, Paulo Freire's book, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is enormously influential. And it really is a vector for so much of what teachers are, in teacher training programs are being indoctrinated with, so that when they go into the schools, they have this playbook for how to turn children into activists. This is what's informing so much of it. So I would look into, there's some really illustrative videos of Henry Giroux on YouTube if you want to look into it. It's spelled Giroux, Paulo Freire, Freire, and it has an enormous influence.
Great. There's a question for Letitia here. Do you have, or are you getting a lawyer network for people whose jobs are in jeopardy due to the imposition of these theories?
Hi, everybody, and thanks for coming. Yes, in fact, we have many lawyers. We've built out a nationwide network of attorneys who are willing and able to take on these cases. So if anybody is in a position where they need legal help, whether it's advice or full-on litigation, please reach out to FAIR.
Great. There's a question about teachers, or this could apply to anyone who's actively pushing back on CRT in their schools. Do we have resources to help put together presentations? And more specifically, are there any DEI speakers who would present DEI trainings with this FAIR mindset? So two things there. One is FAIR is in the process of developing curriculum. We have developed learning standards that we're going to be publishing soon, which would be an alternative to the social justice standards published by Southern Poverty Law Center, which are based on critical race theory. And it's now called Learning for Justice. It was called Teaching Tolerance. And we will also be developing teacher training options for schools that want to embrace a pro-human approach. And the curriculum and the training that we are putting together, we also have workplace training. So we're going to be piloting that with a few, actually one very large corporation, and then some smaller corporations as well, is based on, it is based on a pro-human approach, really building off of Martin Luther King's dream, but also the promise of the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, and true equity, true equality.
I wanted to direct people also to our advocacy toolkit, which is in our members area on the website. I want to put that in the chat so that everybody can see that. This is a really helpful resource. It has step-by-step guide for parents and teachers, a reading list for kids and teens. We have a recommended reading list for adults, and how to get the attention of a politician, how to talk to a critical theorist. So I'm going to drop that in the chat for people. I urge you to sign up with us, become a member, and you can get access. It's free. You can get access to this advocacy toolkit.
I'm seeing a lot of, sorry, Brian.
Oh, go ahead, Orly.
I was just going to say, I'm seeing a lot of questions about what it involves and entails leading a chapter. So leading a chapter would be to build the sense of community, reach out to the media, which we can support you with, organize events and meetups. So you're really building that sense of community, providing support to the community members that are dealing with the different scenarios of facing this, whether it be their private, public school, or their workplace. And so really hosting those events. And if you'd like some more information and you'd really are interested in leading a chapter, I put in the chat a link to a survey you can fill out, and you can we'll capture your zip code and we'll be able to filter that through. If you have not heard from somebody and you've already filled out that form, I also put my email in the chat, and this is specific to people who want to lead a chapter. Once we've interviewed and identified the chapter leaders, we're then able to bring on board all the chapter members, and that's going to be coming out very, very shortly. You should be getting communication from the chapter leaders that we are rolling out as we speak.
Great. I'm just going to cover a few questions because we're actually we have 13 minutes left. I was thinking we had less, but so people have asked about starting chapters or getting involved with FAIR overseas. We are definitely planning to have Canadian, UK, et cetera, affiliates. So that will be coming. And if you do want to get involved, obviously you can still sign up. If you are overseas, you can still sign up as a member. You can join the message boards. There are lots of ways to participate, even when we don't have a FAIR affiliate in your country yet. Somebody was asking about whether the seminar is going to be recorded, and yes, and the recording will be available in the member section. And we've been recording all of these. So if you have a lot of time on your hands and you want to see what other questions have been asked and how they've been answered, then you can watch those as well. There was a question about funding for FAIR. So we have well over 1,000 people who have donated to FAIR. We are member supported. We have, different people have given different amounts. And I would say, just like our membership, our donors are, really across the ideological spectrum. We have people who are major donors to Democratic Party candidates, and then we have people who I would say are more conservative. So our view is that it's very important as an organization to from a funding standpoint, to make sure that we are staying true to our nonpartisan approach. And I think those were the main questions I wanted to cover real quick. Paul, what would be next?
There's a question about, how can FAIR avoid being labeled as a right-wing, reactionary group, and because we're so polarized these days, there's a danger that we could be, framed in that light. It can be hard to shake. There's a question that came in about that, and I think it's a really good question. I think we need to personally, and you can pick, let me know what you think, Brian. I think we really need to help people understand that they're, of the concerned people that are out in the country right now. So, I would say the majority of them are centrists or liberals, and this is something which really does span, is pan-partisan, and watching standards of evidence erode and procedure erode, and to have have so many challenges to objectivity even. As a math teacher, that to me is really just unthinkable to me, that someone could challenge the notion of objectivity even in mathematics. These are not partisan issues, and I think that that's being borne out by the groundswell that we're seeing across the country.
Yeah, there were a couple of questions building on that about if people are affiliated with FAIR, are they worried that they'll be called a racist? Is FAIR concerned about being labeled as racist? How can people or organizations defend themselves from this charge? What I would say is that what I have found so far is that that is actually not really what's happening. That there are people who are, I would say, zealots or dogmatic adherents to what John McWhorter, who's on our board of advisors, has termed a religion, not like a religion. He said it is a religion. But I think that for the most part, people are open to hearing what we have to say. And I think that it's extremely important that as an organization, and I would encourage anyone who is involved with FAIR to embrace the idea that this is not partisan. This is not about, about electing a bunch of Republicans or electing a bunch of Democrats. This is about our culture and issues in our culture. And I think if we can all approach it that way and not buy into this partisan approach, then I think that more people will be receptive to the ideas. And I think there was someone who had suggested adding some prominent left-wing influencers like Dr. Cornel West. Definitely we're open to that. I mean, we do have people who are, quite left of center, on the FAIR Board of Advisors. Thomas Chatterton Williams is a good example, Steven Pinker. Personally, I would love to see Adolph Reed, who's actually a Marxist. He's a Black Marxist professor from University of Pennsylvania, who, to paraphrase, said that, anti-racism, not meaning anti-racism, opposing racism, but anti-racism, the religion, is doing for the ruling class of our country what racism did 100 years ago. So I think that there are many people on the political left in this country, including the far political left, who recognize how damaging and destructive this ideology is.
Here's another question about the number of chapters that's currently on the website. I know that we're very, very close to rolling out a large number of them. Orly, did you want to talk about that?
Sorry, I was just answering question. I'm trying to keep up with the
Oh,
chat.
yeah,
And
sorry.
so the
It's a
question
lot,
is
yeah.
how many chapters, or sorry, what was the question?
Just that on the website, there aren't that many chapters yet. And I know that, this week and next week, we're going to be, I think we're set up to launch about 21 of them.
Yeah, we have about 21 coming out this week and more rolling in. So almost every state across the country has a chapter coming out. So I'll reiterate it again, because I know it's not maybe that clear, and we'll be working on the website as well to be making it much more clear. But you can find current chapters that are already active listed under the chapters section of the website. If you'd like to join a chapter, then you can fill out the FAIR at School form, and you can also do that if you'd like to lead a chapter. If you've already signed on to join or lead a chapter and you haven't yet heard from somebody, I put my email in the chat. It's Orly at FAIR for All. And so if only you want to lead a chapter, then you can email me and I'd be happy to put you in touch with the person that would be in charge of that region. I'm in charge of California currently, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Florida, and Nevada, and several other states as well. So what's happening now is, as we're rolling out and launching these chapters, they will then be getting a list of all the members that have signed on through the website. And then they will be reaching out to inform all of you how to get involved. And if you want to be involved with the chapter, sorry, I'm trying to answer some of these questions that I just read, and you don't want to lead, there's still definitely a place for you. All of you are so amazingly talented and educated and caring human beings. I've spoken to so many amazing people across the country, as have my teammates, and we're actually able to find a place for you. We're building out networks of different professions, and we're able to really connect everybody so that we can be really effective and impactful in propelling our movement forward. So please know that if you haven't heard from anybody, you will be hearing soon. And again, there's a FAIR at Schools form that you can fill out to ensure that we're capturing your information.
Great. One thing, and then I'm going to actually ask Letitia. Somebody said we'd like to hear from Letitia, and I would like to give Letitia, some time to talk about the FAIR Legal Network in general. Somebody was asking if they can get involved if they don't have children or they're not dealing with this in schools, and the answer is 100%. So we are focused on addressing this issue where it exists, which at this point is everywhere in our society. So we have a focus on the workplace, on what's happening with corporations, also in higher education. So there are campus chapters that are being formed, and obviously in K through 12 schools as well. I'm going to turn it over to Letitia to talk in more detail about the FAIR Legal Network.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So as mentioned before, we have formed a network of attorneys across the nation in virtually every jurisdiction who are getting involved and who want to take on these cases. There are some challenges because I think a lot of people for obvious reasons, are a little bit shy about speaking out right now because so much is on the line for them. And there's a great climate of fear right now. But I do think that we have hit critical mass and more people are willing to speak up. So if somebody comes to us with a problem, and if it does indeed state a legal claim, then we can refer them out to one of our network attorneys. And some of these attorneys are pro bono, and many of them are not. We are not going to be doing any of the litigation in-house at FAIR, but we're going to be working with these outside attorneys to do so. And in many of the cases, we can platform them and potentially fund them through crowdfunding capabilities, which we are building out on our own website. There are many legal vehicles available to challenge these critical race theory teachings, including obviously the First Amendment, the 14th Amendment, equal protection, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act, which applies to public employers and private employers, Title VI, which applies to race discrimination in public entities, including public schools. There are also some parallel state laws and perhaps state constitutions that might apply. So there is definitely a way forward, and we at FAIR are mindful of all the legal opportunities that we have to challenge this.
Great, thank you, Letitia. Paul, do you want to pick one or two final questions?
Yeah, there's a question here about how can I find out if my school is is informed by the curriculum, is informed by CRT, or if they're starting to make changes in that direction, how can you find out about it? I would say one way to do it is to identify any consultants that they partnered with, and then do your own research on those organizations. Also, many of the founders of those organizations have academic papers that they've published, which for a small fee you can obtain, and then sort of see if the language matches up with critical race theory jargon. Be attentive to any jargon you might see, which speaks of whiteness, or any type of the obsession with privilege. You can also look at we have a glossary of terms in our advocacy toolkit that you can check and look for those terms in any of the messaging.
Yes, Paul, that's correct. And I would also look out for identity, because that's typically the starting point for many of these teachings. And parents might see references to identity, or we're going to talk about identity today. And that may seem innocuous, but in most cases, it's the first step on the road to intersectionality, which is one of the key parts of critical race theory. So for my own children, I noticed the identity discussions beginning in 2nd and 3rd grade. So just be on the lookout for that.
Yeah, and they don't, to piggyback on what Letitia just said, they don't focus on your personal identity, they focus on your social identity. And so they make that the matrix, and they want to sort of have kids identify with how they're perceived by other people in terms of these categories. So yeah, definitely look out for that. I agree 100%.
Great, do you want to pick one last question?
Trying to find one here. Is FAIR active in offering a counterpoint to the proposed federal anti-racist / neo-racist guidelines? I think this is a reference to the Biden administration's proposed guidelines, but I'm not too clear about it. Does anyone have an answer to that?
I think, yeah, I mean, I know Letitia's, so FAIR is going to have its own organizational response, or I don't know if that's already been posted, Letitia, since today's the deadline, right?
Wednesday.
Oh, Wednesday, good, there's 2 more days. So FAIR will be posting and publishing its own response to it, and then obviously we've been encouraging our members to provide comments, and I don't know if we're single-handedly responsible for it, but there was a significant increase in traffic and a significant increase in the number of comments, that coincided with our network, I think, mobilizing on this issue. So we were really excited to see that. So yes, we are definitely focused on recommending alternatives. And just to be clear, the alternatives that we're recommending are not, to ignore historical injustices or the real issues of racism and intolerance. What we are saying is that the solution to racism is not racism. The solution to racism is a pro-human approach.
Yes, and if you're interested in submitting your own comment, if you go to the FAIR website, you can access we have a link that you can click into the portal. So the department makes it very easy. You can cut and paste your comments and submit it right online on the Department of Education's the regulatory website. So we've prepared a series of suggested comments, and you can feel free to cut and paste from those suggested comments, go right into the portal and paste them and submit.
Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone who is on this webinar. Thank you, Paul, Orly, and Letitia. I'm really could not ask for better partners. We have a big team working on this effort, and I really want to thank everyone who has joined us, who is part of this pro-human movement. And I will just leave you with this thought: we are on the right side of history. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it does bend toward justice. So I would just encourage everyone to feel confident in that. And thank you for being part of this.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.